Okay, now let's discuss this idea that these principles are prima facie rather than absolute. Uh, the idea of a principle being prima facie means this: they do definitely point to features of actions that are always and everywhere morally relevant. It always matters if one does an action that is harmful, that is deadly to another human being or to oneself. It always is morally relevant if one acts in a way that promotes the well-being of another person or gives to them what's fair or honors their capacity for self-determination. Those things always matter, and those are the things to which these principles point. But every one of the principles can be overridden or outweighed in a particular situation. There are always times in which, for example, it's appropriate to do an action that's harmful to another. We don't think that killing necessarily is always wrong. Even a lie, you might say, is sometimes morally justified. Now, when that justification occurs, or for that justification to be present, it's because the moral consideration we're overriding is outweighed by a consideration related to some other moral principle. We don't violate our principles willy-nilly or for no good reason, but we are justified in violating them only when some other valid moral consideration requires us to. If we were to say that our principles were absolute, it would always be wrong to hurt someone, to cause them injury or death. We would always be obligated to act in ways that make everyone affected by our actions better off. There would be no justification for interfering with another person's choices, no justification for ever coercing them. And breaking a promise would always be wrong. But I think we're always going to find situations where we think any of those questionable actions can, in fact, be justified. Consider this example. A promise. Is the obligation to keep a valid promise absolute or merely prima facie? I am arguing that it's prima facie. Consider this situation. I promise you that I will meet you in my office at 2 o'clock to help you better understand course material. However, as I'm on my way to my office to meet you, I come upon a stranger who's been injured in an accident and desperately needs to be taken to a hospital. I'm the only one around with a car, but if I take him, that means I will miss my appointment with you and break my promise. What should I do? Now, this is a moral dilemma because on the one hand, I have an obligation to meet you because I've made a promise. On the other hand, I have a moral obligation to help the injured person by taking them to the hospital. So my moral convictions are in conflict with each other. Now, most would say, I think, that this is a relatively easy moral dilemma to solve, in that clearly the obligation to help the injured person who's about to die overrides the promise the obligation that I have to you because of the promise that I made. One of your writing projects at the end of this unit will be to write about a case study involving a difficult end-of-life decision. That case study, and you will have several to choose from, but whichever one you choose, it will involve a dilemma. It will involve a situation in which reasonable people can disagree about what the right thing to do is. It will involve a situation in which there are important moral considerations in conflict. An essential part of your task in your writing assignment will be to identify the moral considerations, the principles that are in conflict. Which principle or which understanding of a principle points in the direction of doing one thing, which points in the other. And finally, you will be asked to make your own judgment about a proper resolution of the case. What should the person who has to decide in the scenario presented, what should that person do? And why do you think That's what the moral resolution of the case is.